Afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this exclusive discussion on decoding US trade policy, implications, global responses, and strategies for Indian exporters, organized by the Trade Promotion Council of India. We meet at a time of immense disruption and perhaps even more immense opportunity in the global trade landscape. April 2, 2025, which is now famously dubbed as Liberation Day by US President Donald Trump, marked a pivotal shift in the international trade dynamics. On that day, uh, the US imposed a sweeping 10% tariff on all imports, with significantly steeper rates ranging from 11% to 57%, which were targeted at 57 specific countries, including India, while the stated objective was to rebalance trade and revive American manufacturing under the MAGA vision, which is the Make America Great vision. It has actually, as expected, led to a sharp escalation in global trade tensions, economic tensions, stock markets, and concerns, of course, across the board. In just 4 months from Jan to April, actually, average US import tariff rate, as per what I've seen, has surged from 2.5% to over 27%. So it has been happening ever since Trump took power. And while many countries rushed to the negotiating table, the US has, in fact, almost immediately, announced a temporary suspension in tariffs by 90 days and then held firm on China, slapping a staggering 125% tariff on Chinese goods. China retaliated, and there were announcements and statements made on both sides. Current status quo reads 145% tariff by the US and 125% retaliatory tariffs duties by China, which experts say is like a virtual embargo between the two nations. The consequences of this trade war are still unfolding on the ground, in boardrooms, and across policy tables worldwide. For businesses and governments alike, this moment is fraught with volatility. Statements from Washington and Beijing, official and unofficial, seem to change by the day. Will there be a full fledged decoupling? Will the tariffs be rolled back or rise further? Will other countries be pulled into this standoff? But with this volatility comes opportunity for those who read and respond to the situation better than the rest. India, like many others, finds itself at a crossroads. The US is our largest export market. What unfolds next will undoubtedly impact our trade flows. At the same time, intensifying US China tensions have opened new doors. We are seeing glimmers of accelerated China plus one strategy in action again. The last time, of course, COVID, we saw that accelerating. And Apple's aim to shift 25% of iPhone production to India 2026 is just one example of such a shift happening, which gives us some hope. More importantly, India and the US have taken a proactive step by finalizing the terms of reference for a comprehensive trade agreement spanning goods, digital trade, and IP rights. This puts India in a strong position to shape a new bilateral trade narrative, one that could balance ambition with realism and opportunity with resilience. But we need to be very careful about the challenges. A report by ICRIER has shown that India's average tariff rate stands at 17% compared to the US tariff average of 3.3%. In a sector like agriculture, this gap is 39% by India versus 4% by US. So, to what extent can we actually align? Because if we could have aligned it, we perhaps would have done it long ago. And these figures have to be, therefore, will be an important part of the negotiations. So we need to ask some critical questions, particularly what would India seek to secure and give away in these talks, especially in critical sectors like metals, electronics, pharma, chemicals, textiles, and apparel, agriculture, services. And more importantly, how can we make ourselves more competitive finally? We keep asking this question, of course, to become more attractive as a global manufacturing and services hub. Today's webinar is a platform to explore these questions and more. For our session today, we are pleased to welcome our panelists, Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, Professor ICRIER, Dr. Ketan Veera, Director, Pillai HOC Institute of Management Studies and Research, Dr. Nilanjan Banik, Professor and Program Director, Mahindra University, Dr. Pralok Gupta, Associate Professor, Center for WTO Studies, Professor Midul Sagar, Professor and Center for and Head Center for Macroeconomics, Banking and Finance, IIM Kozhikode. Thank you, our esteemed panelists, for joining us today. And I also invite our esteemed audience to bring your insights, concerns, and vision to this critical conversation. Because in a world where the rules are being rewritten, definitely we can conclude that the rules are being rewritten now. India must not only stay at the table, but also help shape the menu going forward. So we will first seek the views of the panelists on the topic and then address audience questions before the end of the session. So to start our discussion, I would like to now come to Dr. Nilanjan Banik. Sir, could you set the context by sharing your views on how these tariff hikes are shaping global trade flows and impacting the broader macroeconomic environment? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Virat. I think you gave an excellent uh, background to what's happening around the world, Uh, if I want to summarize this entire narrative in one sentence, that would be like China is actually trying to build bridges at a time when US has already started building the wall, So let me try to explain what I mean to say. So far what was happening is there was a kind of distinction between US ally vis-a-vis US adversaries, in the sense there was always a basic understanding that US is going to help out its partner, in particular NATO partners, as well as the members of the Quads, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, so on and so forth. But what we are seeing at this point of time is Mr. Trump, he is not kind of distinguishing between who are his allies vis-a-vis who are his adversaries. Now, this put us in a very interesting position because over the last 3 years, since the time Russia attacked Ukraine, for some reason and reason known, you will find that the European Union and the NATO allies, they were going against China because what was happening is China seems to be kind of taking sides with Russia. Now, when I say it's a very interesting time, you have a case where Mr. Trump is openly praising Mr. Putin. And at the same time, you are seeing increased amount of trade happening between China with Canada, China with Mexico, China with European Union. Now, this is a very much something which the world has not apprehended, So what's happening? So what you have already mentioned, and you have given some granular details as to how much trade and tariff, reciprocal tariff, that Mr. Trump has been keep on imposing and then halting, and then maybe try to test the water and try to go ahead and things like that. But in the meanwhile, what China is trying to do, and when I say China is trying to build the bridges, what it is trying to do, it's trying to build up more economic activities with Canada and Mexico. It is trying to do more economic activities with Russia is already there with China, but with the European Union. And it is also trying to do more activities with Southeast Asian region. You may be knowing that I think last week, China has now appointed a special envoy to monitor the trade and investment, what is happening in the southeast part of Asia. You have also noted that this Chinese president have taken a visit to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Now, because of the tariff being in place, what China is cleverly doing, it's actually trying to take up the gap created by the US. For instance, China has now started trading more with Canada because earlier Canada was actually exporting crude oil to US. But because of the Trump tariff, the Canadian crude oil is now finding its way to China. Likewise, if you look into the trade between Mexico and US, you will find one most important component was this refined petroleum product. Now, China is now trying to build a narrative with Mexico so that they get access to the Mexican refined petroleum product. Likewise, most of the vegetable, meat, and sausage, as well as pork and beef items, which were coming out from US to China. Now, because of this tariff war, what China has done cleverly shifted their source of origin from US Now they are procuring most of this meat, vegetable items from countries like Spain, countries like Brazil, countries like Germany. So they are cleverly actually shifting their source of import, you know. At the same time, they are trying to also build these bridges in terms of giving more market access to the product coming to China by removing the tariff and non-tariff barriers to most of the countries where the products are getting originated from, let's say, Vietnam, Cambodia, which now are finding increasingly difficult because of this Trump tariff. You should also remember, going by the data, in the year 2001, when China actually joined WTO, only 30 countries have trade values which was higher than what they were doing with China vis-a-vis US. Fast forward in the year 2023, the latest figures suggest now we have a situation where more than 130 countries, in terms of their trade values, are doing more trade with China as opposed to US. So what it means is China has already cleverly positioned itself as being a largest trading partner for almost 80% of the countries under the WTO thing. What is happening? Not only trade, but also if you look into the investment, you will find almost 1 trillion US dollar Chinese have invested towards building roads, ports. For instance, the entire railway network in Indonesia and Lao PDR is built with the Chinese money. The port, we have been discussing about this in Sri Lanka, or for that matter in Pakistan. These are just some of the examples. Again, the highway, if I'm talking about the highway which connects between Singapore with Kunming, the entire stretch of this highway were built with the Chinese money. So what I'm trying to say is China has diversified not only in terms of doing trade with most of the other countries around the world, but they have also diversified the investment. Now, why China is defiant to the US move? Because China, again, over the last 15 years or so, they have actually shifted their production base. So for instance, most of the automobile components on which US is imposing tariff, which are originating out of Canada and Mexico, are actually the ones where Chinese firm like BYD and Chery International, they have set up their production base in Mexico and Canada, and they are actually exporting. So in fact, the earlier trade representative of US, Mr. Tai, he went on, I think she went on public on a Bloomberg thing saying that most of the Mexican products which are coming into the US are actually made with the Chinese manufacturing giants. Interestingly, again, to give you some data, the trade between Mexico and China has increased by almost to the tune of 30 billion US dollar in the year 2024. At the same time, trade between China and US have actually fallen by 10 billion US dollar. So this is to showcase China cleverly to get away from the impact of both tariff and non-tariff measures. They have actually kind of distributed their production base not only in Vietnam or the Greater Mekong sub-region, but also in the neighborhood of US. In fact, the recent World Bank report suggests the trade with Vietnam with the US, it has increased by 40%. And guess what? What type of product these are? These are the ones which are actually invested by the Chinese firm in Vietnam, because post 2008, after that financial crisis, what Chinese government cleverly did, they actually spread their entire production base in the Greater Mekong sub-region, comprising of this countries like Lao PDR, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. In fact, even if you go to as far as Japan, you will find the laptop, which is actually Sony laptop, is actually made by China. So what I'm trying to give you a snapshot of what's happening is you are seeing a period where China is slowly taking over the vacuum created by the US, Now, China had one problem, and I think because of that, they had this special envoy in the Southeast Asian region, because they had this military engagement with some of the Southeast Asian countries, in particular Vietnam and Philippines, on the who actually own these Spratly Islands on the Pacific coast, So China knows that there are some diplomatic issues that what they need to sort it out, and therefore you see this special envoy being that post getting created. So they want to actually take advantage of this US, what I would say, the, the thing that Mr. Trump is trying to do, and trying to do more trade. Um, they are already investing in investment, as I mentioned, 1 trillion US dollar, but now they are trying to beef up this trading activity more organically with all the erstwhile major trading partners of the US. So that is something what I can see happening around the world. And I think Mr. Trump should take note of this. Otherwise, what's going to happen is going forward, China is soon going to emerge as the bypass the largest, already it has emerged as the largest trading partners, but it is soon going to become a dominant competitor of the US.
Right, right. Thank you so much, sir, for that very elaborate and informative response. And indeed, perhaps this decision by Trump is also a sign that the shift is becoming prominent to bear for the US. Now, Professor Bidul Sagar, I would like to know your view on the risks this tariff policy has on the global economic growth and trade growth. Professor Bidul Sagar, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I have unmuted myself. Thank you for giving me an option to join this webinar of extreme importance. The topic is extremely important. And to straight away answer your question, um, the answer is an unambiguous negative in the sense the impact has bound to be negative as of now. Uh, and the magnitude is pretty uncertain uh, because we do not even know what policies will stay, what policies won't stay. And what we are grappling with is unprecedented uncertainty. Now, this is an event which is not ordinary. It's once in a while event. I would compare what's happening now to something of a Nixon shock of 1971, where the US stopped gold convertibility. And clearly, the global economic order is up for rejig. So we do not know how this temporary moratorium of 90-day period where tariffs increase are not going to be effective, how this period will be utilized to arrive at a new global order. It's not just an issue of the tariffs which were announced on the Liberation Day. It's about the new trade order, how this trade wars will be fought, and it will spill over to currency wars for sure. What we are seeing at Mar-a-Lago was a deep dive on how you have to reshape the world economic order given the challenge to the dollar dominance and how while much of the trade still is invoiced into dollar, we are already seeing shifts in patterns over what is happening in trade invoicing. The dollar is beginning to lose its sheen in several ways, and it's not that it's just the renminbi which is gaining out of it. There is this whole lot of competitive currencies which exist, whether it's euro, which is taking away some of the share, but there are also very smaller currencies which are coming up, be it the reserve composition, be it the trade invoicing. Those patterns are beginning to take shape. Now, if tariffs stay, to my mind, the output loss could be north of 1%, the global GDP. So the global growth could fall north of 1% if the sort of Liberation Day tariffs stay. This is slightly higher than what the multilateral organizations are now projecting in terms of its impact, because they will obviously are on the side of conservatism. But uh, the uncertainty which is now playing itself is killing economic activity. Even if you postpone the effect of the tariffs for now, no business organization is in position to carry on the business as normal. They can't really take large decisions. You may take temporary decisions. You may fly aircrafts to put iPhones from India to US to wherever. All those things will happen. What we are seeing now is the whole supply chain beginning to get a rejig. A great competitive war has emerged. I don't know whether you're aware or not. There are a number of shell companies which are coming up in China to fight this tariff war. So we have to watch out what other countries are doing, and those are playing a sort of a strategy so that the supply chain, the tariff impacts could be minimized. So the supply chains, for instance, China would like to preserve its supply chain. India has to think of its own strategy because we were not even part of the global value chains in the first place. Our presence in the global value chain was very minimal. So we need to really work on it. Today is not the time to tinkering with the policies. What we need is a whole lot of changes that need to be done. The DARPA, for instance, the in the US, the R&D agency, which is linked to the intelligence in the US, they are sort of strategizing the global value chains to see the China plus strategy one or strategies which would actually bring relocation to the US. Now, if we sort of step back and say that let the system evolve, we may lose out some of this competitive game. The second round, which will now get played after the tariffs, is in terms of the currency wars. And basically, you would see some sort of beggar thy neighbor policies coming back. Now, the option is that do we join that in full stream or do we not join that in the full stream? To my mind, it will be a good macro policy not to get into too much of beggar thy neighbor policies, because exchange rate adjustment could be very critical for ensuring the macro adjust. Today, what we are sort of witnessing here is that basically the macroeconomics of it is changing. Luckily, we are in a sweet spot. Our inflation rate today is 3.3%, which is quite below the target. So even if these tariffs put some inflation, I think we can still match it. We need not go per se, but what we need is a trade strategy to focus on gaining from the supply chains. It's not just basically that we need to fight tariff with tariff, which will be counterproductive. It's a good thing that India strategized and began negotiation early on. And while the way the tariff formulas have been used, which is not even a tariff for that matter, on which the tariff was levied, but these are country agnostic. These are still not in terms of what is the geopolitical war which might follow. So we need to keep our options open and strategize something to help the businesses out in this environment of uncertainty, because growth will come down. To my mind, it would be a great year if India could grow by 6% in this environment. There is this possibility that US is beginning to now realize that it is really a Nash equilibrium for them. They're not necessarily gaining out of this strategy because there's a lot of financial disruptions which will follow. You are seeing markets rallying today with small announcements. But these are not long-term trends which will prevail. You will see huge oscillations. So one action and then a rollback, the market jumps. It is simply because there's just too much liquidity and slush money floating around the markets. So we have to be cautious that as business confidence falls, consumer confidence falls under uncertainty, there is no way but the whole macroeconomy will begin melting down. And luckily, we are better positioned than other countries. And we would also gain from oil prices falling. Today, the Brent is trading at 66, which is a phenomenal gain for India. It's way below what we had anticipated. The gap between Indian crude basket and the Brent has now vanished. So we are really gaining on the oil price front. So if we maintain the stability we have, and we should preserve macroeconomic stability in this environment, it's not necessary that capital outflows will hit us as much as our peers. Though there is this tendency that all emerging markets are seen with a common brush, and when risk aversion follows, some hit will come on us. We just have to tide that over in some form and try to gain as much as possible from our trade strategies. This is my limited point today.
Right, right. Thank you so much, sir. You I know I come to this dilemma when I'm moderating such a session. We are discussing a very, very interesting topic, but I have to look at the watch also simultaneously. So
Yeah.
that is the only thing. But obviously, the when you talk about global economy, it's such a complex topic and tough to really cover all these factors in one webinar. But thank you so much, sir. Your points are very well taken and very, very wise and based on sound experience and judgment. I will now come to the questions where we are now specifically going to discuss about the impact on India. And I would start with Dr. Arpita Mukherjee, ma'am, because we have been discussing trade agreements with ma'am for so many years. We've taken her insights. We've never seen a 90-day trade agreement. And I would like to know from you, ma'am, how do you think India should be approaching this kind of an agreement with the US? Over to you, ma'am.
Virat, thank you very much for inviting me. And I think if you go and do a survey of your industry members, many of your members have been asking already for a trade agreement with the US and the EU. Maybe the situation is different, but the industry ask list to have a trade agreement with the large export market has always been there. Second point is that howsoever, if you look at this USTR report, they kind of compile all the trade barriers in one place for the different countries, and we have kind of 18-page long barrier. EU has 36-page long, but they have 28 countries, so they do find a lot of barriers with us. uh, uh, Few in tariffs, I must tell you. If you look at the page, it is one page in tariff, and large part of it is FDI regulation, etc. Whereas if you look at the us in the US, if we really had a good time. If you look at via EU, it had ad valorem duties, other developed countries. US was a relatively open market for us. And therefore, when US started talking about tariff and tariff reduction, I think, that India showed a lot of intention by unilaterally reducing the tariff. But this is probably a country which kind of drove the budget to unilaterally address some of their concerns. Now, the trade agreement with the US has never been a very easy game because they are very comprehensive. They look into deep dives, they look into opening up of sectors. Now, the point is that, it is a tough negotiations, and not that they negotiate too many. But nowadays, the world is moving out of the entire concept of a comprehensive agreement to mini deals. Okay, and this BTA phase 1 is also should be termed as a mini deal. So there is a limited product that the US exports, the limited product that we export. Now, when you look at the export supply chain, because we are talking to an industry audience, what happens is that if we get a good deal, we retain and secure our market share. Now we may still feel we have secured because some industry may say, oh, textile and apparel may say, I got a low tariff, lower than Vietnam. So I'm looking at my comparative picture. And some may say, oh, shrimp, I have got a bad deal than Ecuador. So today you are at a position where some has a good deal, some has a bad deal. Uh, but you also, if you look at the data, the Indian industry was so upset with the GSP, but when the GSP was withdrawn, our trade to US actually increased. So how the US behaves and how our trade behave and how our industry behave is very, very different. But one thing our industry needs to know that they have to be now resilient. And the resilience means that don't go running for protectionism. You need to run for what you need to do to export. You know that because you have to help your government to implement certain reforms and processes. Now, and some places we need to be also a bit practically smarter. Like, for example, if you open up our market for pistachio and bourbon whiskey, etc., I'm very, very sure that we are not going to they are not going to kill us. We will still be in strong in apples. We may be still getting walnuts from UAE. So you have to think it through that we do have trade agreements with other partners. We are bringing in apples from Australia under the trade agreement. So it's not all. But there may be sensitive sectors like chicken legs with the US. That's emotionally sensitive. Okay. Harley Davidson, emotionally sensitive for them. So give something which is emotionally sensitive for them. Get something which is worthwhile for you in your large export sectors. That's what. And if you club it with defense, oil, and something other bigger things, like buying back the Boeing aircraft and things like that, that's I think is a very smart negotiating strategy. I'm going by a smart negotiating strategy. Some cases, tweeting and turning with domestic reform and FDI policy will be something that the US has been asking for, will not harm us. For example, if you remove the inventory-based model restrictions on e-commerce, what harm it is, and put in a condition to make an inventory investment. If you allow agri import, put in a condition for quota. Do not allow milk, allow high-end GI cheese. So you can play around. What I'm trying to say is that industry in India needs to think about a play around. Secondly, industry in India also needs to help the Indian government to build up something like a USTR document. Because today we are going in for FTAs with EU, FTA with UAE, FTA with everybody, and then after the FTA is signed, we hear that we have not benefited. We have not benefited because we haven't always helped to identify the barriers, and this is a good chance for the industry and for the bodies like TPCI. If you face any barrier in the US which you think should be addressed, this is the right time to create a compendium and put it forward to get it vetted and to be discussed. Regarding Mode 4, and Pralok is the Mode 4 master, I am kind of his junior here. I don't want to touch that subject too much, leave it to Pralok. But the main point is, Trump is very favorably disposed towards high-skilled, high-end. He is not going to touch his slowdown of his own technology companies. Use that as an opportunity, but just don't go and ask for H1 visa and wife working and all of that. Ask a bigger ask. Make a bigger ask, make a startup collaborations, be larger than life and think out of the box into from high skill professionals to specialized skills professions. nurses, into many other areas. And I think that's something. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that we need to think out of the box. We need to think how we offer online services. We need to secure the services that we are offering. Now, if there is an export to the US, the majority of the export of the MSMEs often go through the e-commerce channel. Secure that channel, even if it is at the cost of giving moratorium on custom duty to the Americans. So that is something we need to think through. And that is something which the industry can give the feedback better, that which channels are they using for export, how they are exporting. And that helps us to, the Indian negotiators to get that information, and they negotiate as per the industry needs and demand.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. That's a more positive and hopeful picture. So I come to Dr. Pramod Gupta, sir. Incidentally, we often think about our equation with the US in a situation like this, but we tend to forget that we have our two largest trade partners in a trade war with each other. And China is important, though we never talk about, having some kind of an agreement with China. But how will this factor of China now play in India's trade equation with the US in your view? And any critical sectors you would like to highlight in this regard?
Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much, Virat, for the invitation for this important webinar. And most of the discussion today and in the popular media also, when I see, is focused largely on like US or India or tariff and those things and like possible recession. But I have a different take on this thing, and I would say in three important points. One is that to me, in this trade war, the balance is tilted slightly more towards China. And when I say this thing, that it is more towards China or US would be at the receiving end, there are a number of reasons for this thing. So one, the only weapon now US has in this trade war, it seems to be tariff. And that it has already used. And it also proved almost of no use for China, because China equally retaliated. And in fact, probably it behaved in more mature way than it said that after 145% that we will not increase, because there is no point of increasing after that rate. It is just become like just for the sake of safe increasing. After at that high rate, there is no point of increasing. So that is the case with the US. It doesn't have, or it seems not to have any other weapon at this point of time. But if you see China, it has a lot of weapon in its armory. First, that the product that it is exporting to US, it can easily or with some difficulty can diversify its exports market. You can have already seen that some of it is coming to India. We have now 100 billion deficit with China. So that means they are diversifying their export market. So some of these products which are earlier exported to US, they will now shift to some other market. So there will be relatively less impact. Second, in terms of strategically affecting US market. So very important weapon that China has, the first is the critical minerals, rare earths. China has around 70% of rare earth production, and more important, more than 90% of its processing. So that means the entire IT industry, the defense industry, they are dependent on the magnets that are prepared using the rare earth materials that are processed in China. So if China have export restrictions on rare earths, and it last week it has already started putting restrictions on 7 of these hard rare earths. Okay, so then all the industry would be like all this tech industry, defense industry, or EV industry, they will be in a big trouble. The third weapon that China has is the bonds and the dollar. China is the second largest owner of the US bonds after Japan. Now, if you see the stock market behavior after the liberalization day, April 2 and April 5, they behave very differently in US this time. Earlier, whenever there is a stock market crash, the investors started investing in the bond, consider the US bond market is the safest market and their money is safe. But this time it does not happen. They did not invest in the US bond market. Why? Because they thought that US is not the safest market. And as a result, the bond yield increased from 3.9% to 4.5% after April 5th. Now, this has a significant bearing because US bond market is very, very important for US. And probably this is the reason why US has this 90-day pause, because it has seen that the bond yield is increasing. If bond yield is increasing, then the entire US economy could be devastated. Their manufacturing sector, home loan, mortgages, everything would be affected. So that was the third important event. And of course, that I think one of my panelists was speaking about the dollars. So very significant results of dollar. So dollar value could come significantly if China started selling dollar in the market. So considering this point, China is relatively, I would say, in a better situation. Now, what or how it could affect India? What could be possible impact? So I see the impact on India both in a positive way and negative, that there will be collateral damages as well as collateral benefits. Collateral benefits in the sense that some of the market that was captured by uh, Chinese products, they would be now captured by India. For these are into some of the chemicals, some plastic, some machinery. So these Indian industry has a good chance to capture that market, and more so because now the tariff differential between India and China, and of course other countries like you say Vietnam or Bangladesh or Thailand. So the tariff differential we have in the 26% bracket. Of course, that is now posed, even if we assume that is there. And these countries like Vietnam 47%, Bangladesh 37%. So we are relatively better off relatively. Okay. So that is one positive collateral benefit. The second collateral benefit in this could be uh, uh, FDI displacement. So a lot of FDI manufacturing, they could shift to India. We have yesterday only, when I was speaking on the NDTV, there was a news that that Google Pixel, they are now planning to shift to manufacturing to India. Okay, and so is the case for many others. So that is the other advantage that could happen, and some of the investment, not from Chinese company, but from the uh, uh, other countries investment in China, they will shift to India because India is a sweet spot. We are relatively stable, better than many other economies in the region. So that is the naturally favorable choice for foreign investors. But if you talk the negative externalities or collateral damage, the first would be that there is a high chance that there would be a recession going forward because of that US-China war, because ultimately that production would be affected because of high tariffs, because of increased prices, because of supply chain disruptions, and that will have a collateral damage on Indian industry also, because the recession income will come down. As a result, there would be a reduction in the exports of Indian industry also. The second would be, I mentioned that there would be increase in the deficit with the China. So our dependence on China will increase. Some of the sectors which could benefit, of course, the textile sectors, our pharma sectors, and jewelry sector, labor intensive sector, they would definitely benefit. Okay. But some other sectors, particularly like if you say like related to the semiconductors or IT or the inputs which are used in the high tech sector, they would be probably at a some kind of disadvantage, considering there would be short supply, there would be supply disruptions. So then that could affect those sectors and their use, and there would be problem for the consumers also. But two things in the we started the discussion today with that there is a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity. But in this uncertainty, I say that two things are relatively certain that I can see going forward in another 3-4 months. One, there would be a bilateral trade agreement between India and US that I can see will almost certain, and because this is now India was of course. We know that India was on a front runner for this thing. Our PM announced when he went to US in February, and there were unilateral concessions. But now US has also realized that having a deal with a country like India is in its own benefit. It has to show that within 90 days it had it found something beneficial. Otherwise, no country will take serious. China has already given its kickback. Okay, so it has to show that it has gained something out of that 90-day pause period. Okay. Second thing that I was talking about is the recession. So that is also almost certain that there would be a decrease in the global demand, global output. Most of the agencies, whether it is multilateral or individual credit agency, they have predicted. So these two things I clearly predict, and there may be some other countries that will have some agreement with US going forward, like Japan or Korea, but there are different problems. Our problems are different from those problems. Our problem is not like for reducing these tariffs or thing, because we have unilaterally reduced. For many other sectors we can reduce, because this has been done for other FTAs also. Main challenge would be non-tariff barriers from India's side. But for other countries, the challenge would be that how a deal materialized. Like Japan. Japan already held a deal with US in 2019, Trump 1.0. So they decided that there won't be any tariff on automobiles. But this time, Trump decided to impose a tariff 25% on automobiles. Now, in spite of a deal, if you have a tariff on automobile, then if you further negotiate now to have an agreement, how will you negotiate? What would the sanctity of that agreement? All these questions come into play. So for other countries, it would be really difficult as compared to India. So India is in a relatively better position to negotiate the BTA, and I am relatively sure that BTA would be there. At the same time, there would be some recession also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I hope there'll be sanctity also, because as you talked about sanctity, that is a question that certainly came to mind. I'll come to Dr. Ketan Veera now, sir. I read a very interesting post on LinkedIn which trended a lot, that, even though you can unleash such a cataclysmic event on the global trade, um, like the US did, supply chains cannot really be, realigned overnight. You're suddenly one country supplying, and actually no one country supplies everything. It's an entire value chain that works. So suddenly disrupting global supply chains and thinking that they'll be remade overnight, it never happens. But for India, the current situation, since we are talking about opportunity, we keep talking about being an alternative to China. So from here on, what is your view on how India can benefit from the situation? Suggestions for government as well as industry.
So, as you rightly mentioned, that when we talk about agile supply chains and everything, it's not as easy as it sounds. But if you look at it, we already have an experience of COVID-19 where we have done a lot to have a strong, robust supply chains. Now, what comes to my mind, if you look at how it has evolved over the years post-COVID, during Biden's regime, they spoke about friendshoring. And as Nilanjan sir rightly mentioned, now the friendshoring also will not work because Trump's tone has changed. So, anyways, for India, there is an experience of mobile phones, which I think Nilanjan sir and one more people. When we talk about India's exports today, top of the mind comes our mobile phones exports. So, if you look at 17, 18, we had a very small share of $350 million of mobile phones being exported. Within 5 years, we have reached $1 billion. So, this is a phenomenal growth. So, very clearly, what has happened is when we talk about supply chain, we have to create an ecosystem. To greater extent, we have been successful in doing it for mobile phones. So, number one, very clearly, we have to develop internal ecosystems in such a way that some way or the other, the cost reduction, the skill benefit can be transmitted through the existing supply chains also. Because we cannot think about, moreover, there's another concern also in this changing world order, right? We don't know how the trade equations are going to be over the years, right? So, some way or the other, we need to now work on friendshoring. We should work on global south, which very clearly is another huge potential. We will definitely have to become a part of China plus one strategy. Moreover, BRICS, we need to again focus on, because some way or the other, friendshoring can work to a greater extent in this situation where we see a clear rift between China and USA. So, some way or the other, we have to go for a balanced approach of some sort of friendshoring, some sort of taking a lessons of creating an ecosystem, what we have done in our mobile phone manufacturing sector. So, it can be a self-learn lessons rather than to learn lessons from elsewhere now. So that is my stake on the global supply chains.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Actually, we are running way short of time, but I'll uh, actually try to wrap it up a little quickly. I know we had a lot of questions apart from this, but before we come to the audience, I had one question regarding the internal competitiveness, because we say that I was talking to somebody who said that even despite the tariff differential, India is not as competitive as Vietnam or a Bangladesh. It may not be in some sectors of apparel, for instance. So, we talked about we implemented the PLI scheme over the past 2, 3 years. So, what are the critical learnings from the panelist view, and what now? What should be our next approach towards competitiveness? That is one question which I thought if I could get any response from anyone.
Can I take this?
Yes, yes.
So, internal competitiveness, as we have seen the production linked incentives, right? Some way or the other, government has come saying that it will not be extended beyond sectors, but two sectors which have really benefited. One is a mobile phone, and the second is your pharma industry. So, some way or the other, this has really helped us to a greater extent. We cannot deny the fact, because very clearly in pharma company itself, we were able to create a good amount of jobs, and we were able to even increase our exports. We have emerged as one of the leader now in case of pharma. So very clearly, this production-linked incentive, unfortunately, the recent announcement says that the government is not planning to extend it to any other sectors. Even the deadlines will not be extended. But some way or the other, on a similar line, some strategy need to be developed, which has to be supported with other fiscal benefits also. As we have been talking about Vietnam, see, Vietnam also started with PIL. Along with this, they came up with tax holidays and many other benefits. Now, I'm not saying that we have to exactly take tax holidays as a lesson, but some additional fiscal stimulus need to be worked on. So that is one stake which definitely I have on how to increase our internal competitiveness.
Arpita ma'am?
The, uh, Virat, the problem is there is a problem, there is a solution. The problem is that sector specifics, these kind of incentives are actually WTO non-compliant. Okay, that they can be termed as actionable subsidies. Suppose if you export a lot of mobile phone through PLI, US can impose a countervailing duty. I'm just giving you the broader example. However, there can be some ways in which you can smartly, give the subsidy through the services. And if you give not the WTO is functional. Even if the WTO is not functional, you should not keep an avenue open for countervailing duty. So you can actually, because the manufacturing is using a lot of services, you can give an indirect subsidy through the services to help the manufacturing sector. The second point is you have to ease the cost of doing business, and that you can do by going for more paperless trade, removing so many, if you are signing regulatory cooperation agreements, more than that, regulatory agreements where you don't need to do double testing, double certification, those will reduce your cost of export. So what I try to propose is that we need to look at industry specific cost of export and try to reduce those cost of export. We have done a lot of things in terms of facilitating the clearance process, others, but quality control is now also a big issue for many companies exporting, because they are also importing. So all the supply chain issues need to be looked through. Certain policies we need to have a very clear position, like, do we really want an SEZ, do we not want an SEZ? Those are things that we need to think it through. The reason probably that the government is not thinking about PLI is that now we are in a world where one sector or the other is not being targeted. We were targeting PLI to attract investment. In electronics and many other places, we got investment from the foreign companies in PLI. But if you look at the food sector, you will not see any major investment coming from, other countries in the food sector. So it is mostly the domestic investment. So it is mostly that you are giving the incentive to the domestic firms. Now we need to really understand what can be done to attract the FDI. And how do we build in more partnerships between our domestic companies and foreign companies? And the second point that I wanted to say is that most of the large players are already in India. We now need to have a device in which the medium scale Indian firms can partner with medium scales and small scale firms abroad. That's something we need to think through.
Actually, ma'am, yes, a very valid point. Pralok Gupta, sir.
Yeah. So I see this PLI kind of schemes that from two perspectives. One, to compensate the incentives given in other countries. So because other countries are giving incentives somewhere or other, others are doing so, why not? We should also do. Obviously, we can't have our industry at a disadvantage. And the second part, to compensate for inherent disadvantage within Indian economy, which are like Professor Prita Mukherjee was saying, the ease of doing business, those sort of thing. So my take is that as far as of course, these are not defined component. These are, I would say, more like analytical component, I would say. So as far as the first thing is concerned, that those incentive which are given to compensate the disadvantage because other countries are also giving directly or indirectly, that should continue in some way or other. Of course, now WTO is more or less dysfunctional, but considering different WTO rules and other things, okay. But those which are for our inherent disadvantages, that we should definitely work upon. And primarily, for example, if you say still the power cost, that is too high in our country, and then erratic power supply, red tapeism, in some sort of corruption, is still the setting up a business is not that easy. Having said that, we have a lot of emphasis on uh, mm, entrepreneurs setting up business, but still there are a number of reports. I'm just saying from the anecdotal evidences, the reports in media, that still the entrepreneurs, they face a lot of problem. Though the government has improved a lot of on these things, but still there is a significant scope. Then the transportation, road railway infrastructure, again a lot of improvement, but still a lot need to be done. Okay, so these things, if they can reduce your export cost maybe 3-4%, and that's a huge margin in the global trade. If 3-4% could be saved through these measures, then our exporters could be very competitive in the international market. So these are the areas where one need to work.
Right, right. Thank you so much, sir, for that response. I'll just take a quick look at some of the audience questions which we can answer. There's one question which says that when India is still dependent on China for a number of items, can we take advantage of the situation in a short span of time? I think it means probably imports would become from China would become cheaper, I guess. That's the implication of the question. Anybody can take it up.
Yeah. So I think I was discussing. Oh, please, if somebody else.
No, please go ahead, then I'll add to it.
So as far as advantage concerned, so that is already, I think, started, as I was mentioning, that our deficit has increased significantly. So that is happening. There would be some benefit in terms of the reduced cost because the export items would be available probably at a lower cost. So we should take, but at the same time, it could also affect our domestic manufacturing. So it's not that if we are purchasing at a lower cost or now easily available at a lower cost, that is always beneficial. It may be beneficial in the short run, but in the long run, our domestic industry may be adversely affected. So we have to be very careful about this thing. So that's my take on this China question.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to add to it, you see, basically what is happening is that suppose I'm hypothetically thinking like a manufacturer, and I think, wow, this is the right time for me to import from China, and then I can export to the US. It is not going to be as easy because now the rules of origin will also start applying, and everybody is trying to route and reroute product. And America, if you look at the way they are now talking about the rule of origin, it is going to be difficult. And with in products like electronics, the value chain is very fragmented. So what percentage is produced in which country is also very difficult to estimate. And overnight, you cannot set up your manufacturing and export. So what you need to think about is you need to think about the supply chain, but also think about the rules of origin and how the countries are imposing the rules of origin. And because that will enable you when you are looking into the supply chain, when you are catering to the domestic market, you don't need to think that much. But if you are trying to be a part of the global value chain, then your rules of origin and what are the value addition that you are able to do becomes an important point in this current scenario.
Right, ma'am. One critical question, of course, is F&B exports. How will the tariffs impact? Although there's a moratorium on the tariffs, but I think anything you'd like to add, ma'am, to that? We have seen some analysis on this, of course, in the papers.
See, basically, what you see is that the tariff. One good part is up till now they haven't, apart from automobile or steel and aluminum on specific countries, they haven't really imposed a sectoral tariff. Now imposed a very blanket tariff. So your one sector is not really, but apart from the automobile and auto component, no sector can say that I'm better off or I'm worse off vis-a-vis the others. But having said that, FMCG is a very big sector. Within that sector, you need to know where you stand in terms of your competitors, in terms of their tariffs into the US market, which product you have competitiveness, where are you sourcing your inputs from, and how do you want to manufacture and become a bigger part of the value chain. That is the most important point. From our perspective, India has very limited sectors where there are manufacturing restrictions. India has restrictions on services, FDI and others, but manufacturing restrictions, it is always promoting manufacturing. So what kind of issues do you face is very important. They may be related to quality control, they may be related to sourcing raw materials. That has to be clearly brought up and discussed.
Right. Yeah, and actually, one question again on the containers. We had this question in the COVID time also, how this could impact the freight rates because and container availability across the globe. So I think this is a major challenge that would face global trade in the current scenario because China owns containers.
Yes, correct. And I would leave it to others also to respond to it. But the fact remains, what you are trying to say is that you as you de-risk your trade, what is important is when you de-risk your trade, you have to de-risk the sources of your critical minerals, you have to de-risk your supply chains, as well as you have to de-risk your logistics and transportation. Because it can be container today, it can be certain sea routes being closed tomorrow. You understand? So you need to think about multiple routes to trade. So therefore, all of these de-risking has to be thought through together. Now, what China did, and that is very important. China first kept a closed economy, grew big. Then once they grew big, they opened it in the WTO. They grew further using the WTO. Then they started putting restrictions by restricting the US technology companies. So the China went in a very different way. And then US retaliated. After all these years, US then started retaliating when China went kind of closed the doors to the US technology companies. But the fact remains is that China did put in certain strengths to go somewhere. Every country does not have that capacity to do so. So they can deal by making strategic partners and keeping certain alternative routes, like alternative routes, trade, alternative systems to getting containers. So even if it is not from, say, China, maybe from the US, maybe from Australia, you have to think it like that you have to look at other trade partners to move around. And the other reason that China controls the containers also because China controls the trade. Because if you are sending the container, you are bringing it back, right? You have to have so therefore, because they are controlling the world trade, and earlier they and the US, they could control a lot of other things related to the trade.
So, can I just
Yes, sir,
come in
please.
on this issue of containers? So if you would have noticed, the US strategy has been, it has announced basically levies on the Chinese shipping. So what they have done is that they are saying $1.5 million per port call on a Chinese ship. So per se, what is happening here is that there is an effort to reroute the shipping containers business as well. Uh, Per se, I don't see how container ships, the price for the containers is bound to go down as we saw during the global financial crisis and the pandemic, because global trade will fall big time. I mean, if you've seen what the trade projections came out in the World Economic Outlook a couple of days back, that's a massive fall, and it could be a lot more than what at the moment is being calculated in. Uh, it all depends on whether US stays with its plan, pushes it or not, or does it roll back. From our angle, what we have been discussing so far, I think there is one opportunity which has emerged, because our trade policy was too protectionist. We are all talking of protecting our businesses, but are they competitive? With greater competition, they can become more competitive. I mean, we don't need PLI indefinitely. I mean, if it is going to be white labeling, then obviously this is not something a very good policy forever. So it is short term that we need to support these policies, but eventually we need to generate competitive businesses for it to thrive on their own. And I see this as a major opportunity with the lowering of tariffs. Till now, we have never bothered about the consumer surplus in our trade policy. We are only looking at producer surplus, and that's not good for the welfare of the consumers, and that's not good for the economy. This is the point I want to make.
So,
Thank you, sir. Yes.
two quick points on the
Yes, sir.
competitiveness and as well as the how to make our exports more resilient. One thing is, if you're looking into the PLI scheme, already it has started giving results. In particular, if I'm looking into the mobile sector, mobile telephony. But if I look into the amount of money which is being allocated for the PLI scheme, it is around 18 billion USD, which is almost like 20% of what we spend annually on giving agricultural subsidy. Now, given what we have seen in the case of mobile telephony, if we can extend this, not necessarily for a particular sector over a long period of time, but to other sectors, presumably we may get some benefit in the short run. The second point is we can also tweak around with the GST, because one of the study that we have done actually showcased that even if we reduce the GST by 6 to 7% on apparel, that will make our exports much more competitive. So we don't have to rely on how much the US is imposing an tariff. And finally, more than I think some of the earlier speakers also mentioned, for instance, if I take into steel, if I take into both tariff and non-tariff measures, the total amount of duty comes to around excess of 200%. So when I'm talking about only 25% in the whole realm of thing, it's only a minuscule amount of, if you were to consider the non-tariff measures. And finally, I think government should come up with what some of the southern states are doing, and therefore they are more industrially progressive, is they should give land in the, or what we say, plug and play kind of thing. You developed a piece of land where you get give a single window clearance so that you get access to electricity, water supply, access to finance, and other things, you know. So that kind of thing will be benefited for our exports.
Right,
Something
sir.
similar to textile parks, right, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right, sir. I think there are so many questions still coming in from the audience, and there's a lot we would like to still discuss with you. But thank you so much, sir. I think we'll have to end the webinar at this session, at this point. So thank you so much, everyone, for spending time with us today and sharing your brilliant insights and experienced perspective on this very, very important topic. And I am pretty confident this is not the first time we'll be sitting on this and discussing this. And love to stay in touch with you all individually as well, and continue this discussion forward. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.